Welcome everybody to Anti-Modern Slavery Changing the Conversations. This is part of a series of events that some of which I've been lucky enough to host. If you've missed any of them, you can rewatch them back on the Possibility Club, and my colleague Molly will pop a link into the chat for that. This is a conversation we've been having over the last year. Anti-modern slavery is a difficult topic. I have to admit, as a host on this, I was somebody who had very little knowledge, maybe deliberately, on this topic, let's be very honest. And I found these sessions to be incredibly empowering and educational. And it's been impactful for me because I feel I can now go and do something. I'm not afraid to address this topic, to look for this in my own community, and feel that I can actually impact change. Because that's sometimes topics like this, it can feel a little overwhelming and you want to be in denial that anything like slavery could be happening in England, but it is. But these are all very powerful conversations. We're going to have another one of them today, and our topic today is modern slavery in Sussex, implications of the Nationality and Borders Bill on modern slavery support in Sussex. And the format of today's event is going to be that we have three wonderful panelists. We're going to hear from each of them in turn, and then we'll go into a group Q&A. Key for me is please do ask questions in the chat as we go along. We want this to be a conversation. I've asked the panelists to ask questions of each other. This is a discussion that we're all here to have, that we need to be having. Because at a time when organisations and society in general are growing in confidence about what is modern slavery, how to spot it and report it, questions have been asked as to how the Nationality and Borders Bill will impact on the work that has started. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be reflecting on the potential impact this bill will have. And the Anti-Modern Slavery Project brings together a host of activities, research and content. And as part of this, we've set up a community content hub, as I mentioned, which is the Possibility Club. And you can sign up to the Anti-Modern Slavery Circle to join a community of people and organisations interested in discussing, debating and disrupting. It's a place to share ideas, build collaboration and move towards changing the conversation. There we go. As if by magic, the Possibility Club is on the screen. We would love to hear your thoughts, your perspectives, get involved. This is a conversation that doesn't stop when we come off of this call, of course. And this is a great place for you to come and join us and be a part of that. And we've been bringing together through these sessions, cutting edge research, business innovation, grassroots practice in the community and individual lived experience. We're pooling our knowledge to see what the future might look like. And it's been everything from religion to music groups. The diversity of the panelists on these sessions is fantastic. It shows how many people are involved in this conversation. And this project, this conversation is being funded by the University of Sussex and the Economic and Social Research Council to help translate academic knowledge into action. And the activity is facilitated by Always Possible. I'm a member of the Always Possible team. My name is Lucy Payne, and we are a unique consultancy looking at 21st century problem solving through connected conversation. That's all the background and enough for me. I say my role here, I'm a facilitator. As you probably gathered, I'm far from being an expert. I'm here to learn and to move forward. And I'm going to stop talking now and introduce our first panelist. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for the invitation. I've been really looking forward to the webinar today. So hopefully I'm going to now share my PowerPoint presentation. If somebody could just let me know so that I know it's come up from your side, that would be great.
If you want to do the slideshow.
Yep, could everybody see?
I can see your slides, Bill, the ones down the side as well. So it's...
Okay, it does have it as large on my screen, so I'm not sure why that isn't working. Will it be okay to continue as it is?
Yeah, it will. That's absolutely fine. We can still read them.
Yeah, I have tried to put it on slideshow mode, but it hasn't worked, so apologies for that.
No problem.
So hi everybody, my name's Sam Lakesmith. I'm the Modern Slavery Victim Care Head of Service at Migrant Help, which is a charity organisation. What I thought I would do initially is just go through some of the key services that Migrant Help provides, as it's not just anti-trafficking services. So firstly, we do have the government contract, which is called AIR, with regards to asylum support. MSVC is a Modern Slavery Victim Care Contract, so we're a subcontractor by the Salvation Army, who have the government contract, and we specifically provide accommodation and outreach support services, which also includes Move On following positive CG in the southeast of England. We also have trafficking contracts in Scotland, so we are the prime contractor for the Scottish Government accommodation and outreach support services there. And then trafficking in Northern Ireland, we are the prime contractor for the Department of Justice, and once again it's accommodation and outreach support services in Northern Ireland. We also run a vulnerable persons resettlement scheme, which is based in East Kent. Also, it's not on here, it's the Hong Kong Welcome Programme as well, which is kind of sort of falls under that bracket, and Afghan resettlement, so an emergency response support for newly arrived Afghan refugees in Kent. EUSS, which is the advice and support with applications for EU settlement, clear voice interpreting and translation services across the UK, and that's a social enterprise. So all profits from that go back into the parent company of Migrant Help to support our service users. And finally, we are digital, which is assisted support for online UKVI applications. So what are Migrant Help's key values? So they are protection, so everybody deserves to feel safe and have their human rights protected. Diversity, respecting and celebrating everybody's individual experiences and ensuring inclusion is at the heart of our work. Innovation, embracing new ways of working that deliver more effective and streamlined services. Equality, so we believe in fairness and equality of opportunity. Partnership, committed to working in partnership with all those who help us to achieve our vision. And finally, excellence, so providing the best quality services and achieving the highest standard of client care. Our vision is for a global society that protects survivors of exploitation and displacement and treats them with respect, enabling them to thrive as individuals. So just to start off with regards to the modern slavery work, some statistics. So in terms of worldwide modern slavery statistics, and the source is the International Labour Organization. So 40.3 million victims trapped in modern day slavery. We've got 24.9 million victims exploited for labor, 71% of victims are women and girls. 25% of victims are underaged. And 19%, as another example, are victims of forced sexual exploitation. With regards to the UK,
yeah, what we'll do, let me just pop Sam a message and see if she's okay. I know she was having some tech challenges when we got going, so hopefully I might ask her to restart, because I was having some problems, I think, from the second or third slide. So let's come to you, Joe. I mean, I was already making some notes there with Sam's presentation about their background and when they found it. So I've got questions for her when she comes back. Maybe that's why she's gone. But Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Lucy. So yeah, I'm Jo Wilding. I work at Sussex University, and before I came into academia, I was a barrister. So I did a lot of work on immigration and asylum cases, including trafficking cases from that perspective. And my work as a researcher is about access to legal advice, access to legal aid, particularly on immigration and asylum. So that's really relevant to all trafficking survivors that are not UK nationals. So I just wanted to really briefly introduce kind of trafficking survivors' rights to legal aid, because that's not necessarily obvious. And then just talk you through a national shortage of advice, the local picture for provision and demand for advice. And then just talk briefly about the consequences for trafficking victims. And then I'll pop some links in the chat if anybody wants to follow up with more information, because I've published a ton of stuff about it. So trafficking survivors' right to access legal aid advice is mainly linked to them having a separate immigration or asylum application underway. So for example, an asylum claim that rests on being a victim of human trafficking. I should just say I use trafficking kind of interchangeably with modern slavery, and I know that's not exactly comparable, but it's habit a bit. So linked to separate asylum or immigration claims, related matters like compensation claims after a positive decision, judicial review of a negative reasonable grounds or conclusive grounds decision. So there's quite a lot of that. And also now under the Nationality and Borders Act, it's proposed that there'll be a bolt-on for legal advice providers to advise someone on whether or not to enter the national referral mechanism. And the proposal is that will be £75, which is supposed to be about an hour and a half of advice. But there's a very serious shortage of legal aid provision across England and Wales. I've just obtained freedom of information data on provision across England and Wales and exactly how many legal aid matters are being opened by each office in the country over the course of the year. So the contract runs from the beginning of September to the end of August each year. In the last contract year, there were 262 officers that had a contract at some point in that year. They reported between them 32,714 matter starts in the year, so just under 33,000. It was an increase of about 5,000 on the year before, but government statistics on asylum indicate there were 63,089 applications for asylum by main applicants. So ignoring dependents, just over 63,000 applications in the year to June 2022. So the statistical years don't exactly match up, but it's quite close. Now, probably about 4,000 to 6,000 of those people would have been accommodated in Scotland. The asylum support statistics are temporarily down, so I can't get the exact number, but that leaves a deficit of at least 25,000 between provision and need in England and Wales. So once you've taken off that 5,000 or so in Scotland, in England and Wales, it means almost half of the main applicants, excluding dependents, who claimed asylum in the year to June 2022 would not have had a legal aid representative, would not have been able to access that. That compares with a deficit the year before of at least 6,000, which was massive, but clearly far smaller than 25,000. And that looks like about 1 in 6 people unable to access representation. You can't be exact because you don't know that every new legal aid matter concerned an asylum case. Some of them would have been settlement applications at the end of refugee leave, for example. But those are the minimum deficits. And providers just can't afford to take on more cases because the fees are too low, because of the time and the cost of bureaucracy, because of cash flow, because of Home Office delays, and also because there is a recruitment crisis across the country. So even if they want to recruit, they often can't do that. Just to depress you a little bit more, though, it's actually even worse than those numbers suggest. So one of the biggest immigration legal aid firms in England and Wales, which has offices all over the country, has since October been informing all its clients that it won't take on any new appeals work, even for the people it's currently representing who are waiting for a decision on their asylum applications. So if you get a refusal, you don't have a representative anymore, and you've got 14 days to find a new one and lodge an appeal. And they expressed it as, we have no more capacity for appeals work. But the thing is that a new fixed fee was implemented in place of a temporary hourly rate. It represented no increase on the old fixed fee in terms of the rate of pay, just sort of was a bit larger because there's more work involved in the procedure now. So similar letters have been sent by other firms. One of them said the firm couldn't represent the client on appeal because of the client's failure to provide an updated letter confirming they were still receiving asylum support. Now, people don't get updated letters, so the firm needs to have a letter dated within the last 6 months. Otherwise, they have to do a separate means assessment for the client. The original letters come from Migrant Help, actually, so maybe they can, confirm that. But the freedom of information response shows that that particular firm that sent that letter had 2 offices, neither of which took on any new asylum matter starts, so any new asylum cases in the last contract year. So that suggests they never actually intended representing that client on appeal. So the lack of updated asylum support letters is both an excuse but also a genuine problem, because they then have to do more work to do a separate means assessment when actually we all know they're still in asylum support, they still don't have the right to work, they're still in the process. So you know, the legal aid agency also introducing unnecessary hurdles. And what that means is that potentially a large number of people are losing their representation when they're refused asylum. So they've got a limited time to appeal, and they're also looking for a new representative, but in competition with that huge number of people who are looking for a representative in the first place to make their application. And legal aid lawyers say they can make almost twice as much money doing applications as they can for the same amount of work on appeals, because they get fixed fees for both, but they can often do the application for asylum within the fixed fee that they get, but they can very rarely do the appeal within the fixed fee, so they make losses on it. And so that's what's driving some people out of doing that appeals work. But also you have a lot of providers just withdrawing altogether because they can't survive on legal aid anymore. So focusing in on Sussex, we've got one legal aid provider for the whole of Sussex and Surrey. That's the legal aid agency's kind of administrative region for immigration, and that's the Immigration Legal Service at Brighton Housing Trust. There's nothing in Hastings, nothing in Eastbourne, nothing in Chichester or anywhere else that people are now being dispersed to for asylum accommodation. And that one provider in Brighton is small. Their team was cut in half at the time of the legal aid cuts in 2012. So they reported 111 new legal aid matter starts in 2021-22, so that last contract year. So 111 is the sort of provision number. Brighton, East Sussex and West Sussex between them in 21-22 were looking after 173 unaccompanied children. So, and that may well have increased as well, but this year's statistics are not in yet. Now, they won't all need advice at the same time. Some of them will have asylum and not need immigration advice, but that doesn't include care leavers who may well still need legal advice. So it's very easy to see how, you know, the unaccompanied children might fill all of that capacity. Remember, it's only 111 cases, even before you look at 179 people who were dispersed to Sussex as of September 2021. So people seeking asylum accommodated in Sussex. So that was 91 in Hastings, 67 in Brighton, 21 in Chichester. As I said, the statistics are currently down, but it will be higher now because there's an overall project to increase dispersal throughout different parts of the country. And that doesn't include the hotels. And on top of that, which is already, you know, roughly 3 times the capacity of the single provider, there's 104 non-UK nationals in Sussex prisons, and a risk that some of those might have trafficking indicators, but with no access to immigration legal advice, it's quite unlikely that would be picked up. There's also domestic violence applications, settlement applications at the end of someone's refugee leave, resettled refugees that need to make settlement applications at the end of their leave. So a huge amount of demand even before you get to potential victims of trafficking and modern slavery. So for the Southeast, excluding London, the statistics were that 598 people have been referred into the National Referral Mechanism by local authorities and police. That's for the Southeast as a whole, and maybe that somebody's got more sort of localized statistics, but then add to that an unknown proportion of the people that were referred in by NGOs, by government agencies. And that's likely to be, the total is likely to be about 2/3 of those being non-UK nationals. In terms of advice in Sussex outside the realm of legal aid, which could also be relevant, the only organisation accredited at level 3 of the framework from the Office of the Immigration Services Commissioner, so able to do, theoretically, accredited to do advice, casework and representation, is us at Sussex University Migration Law Clinic, and we do advice only. We actually don't do casework for operational reasons, and we work in term time only. And so there's nothing thing at the highest level. The only organisation doing level 2 casework in Sussex is Voices in Exile in Brighton, who are brilliant, but really small and permanently facing these cliff edges of funding in particular. So just briefly, the sort of the consequences for potential victims of trafficking and modern slavery. Firstly, just the lack of access to advice and representation for what are complex legal cases. But it's not always obvious that they might be trafficked until a lawyer looks into someone's case, especially when they're criminal cases. So there's a real risk of non-identification. Without advice, they're much less likely to enter the national referral mechanism. And although it's positive that there's now a bolt-on for giving advice on entering the national referral mechanism, that lack of provision makes it unlikely to be effective or to be meaningful. The one small bright side is that some lawyers are moving all of their capacity into public law instead of immigration law because it's more financially viable. So they're able to do the sort of the challenges, the judicial review challenges to a negative decision, and they get costs from the Home Office if they win, which frankly you often do. So in theory, there's plenty of provision for trafficking judicial reviews, but then a real risk of those cases never being picked up if the lawyers are unable to do the initial applications and appeal work that would lead on to judicial review work. So the summary really is there's a significant deficit in provision, a significant lack of access to advice, leading to a real risk of non-identification or of people being unable to access protection, especially when it's further leave after a positive conclusive grounds decision. I'll just pop those links into the chat, but that's all I wanted to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. As you say, it's those figures are astounding, and as you say, very concerning. I wanted to slightly go off topic and ask: is this an international issue? Are other countries suffering? And I'm not putting you on the spot as an expert in this topic, but I wondered what your perspective was. Are there any countries getting this right? Is it that there are there's a lot more people movement internationally that everyone's suffering with this?
I think it's quite hard to say because first of all, because there's not much in the way of kind of comparative research out there. Secondly, that every other country has a really different legal system from us and quite a different decision-making system. So most countries don't have, you know, the immigration authority making decisions on whether someone's a victim of trafficking. So that's a part of the problem. Where there is comparative research is I did some research looking at the situation in Scotland, because they have a separate legal aid system, but the same immigration system and the same trafficking decision-making system or national referral mechanism. They have much better access to legal advice because of the way that they fund it. So it's funded on hourly rates, and although those are quite low and lawyers would complain about those, they don't have the level of bureaucracy that we have with the legal aid agency down here. So yeah, there's definitely ways that it can work better, but I don't know, to be honest, about the rest of Europe and how they manage it. Whenever you talk to a legal aid lawyer in the rest of Europe, they all sort of say it's not good, but I don't know the extent to which it's better elsewhere for trafficking particularly.
I'm always looking for a perspective, isn't it? It's like, are we missing a trick here? It sounds like it's just become more and more complicated over time, and unpacking that is something that that's a huge job in itself, isn't it? But if Scotland have a better system, at least that's very directly relevant, you know, attached to us. We can take some of their guidance, but it needs someone to be a reformist to come in and change that.
Yeah, and I think what you've got in Scotland is this sort of, in the Scottish Legal Aid Board, they actually talk about thinking in systems. They actually overtly have that as part of their sort of underpinning you know, policy development, and we don't have any of that here. So it's all Home Office come up with something, often something frankly bonkers, and then the legal aid agency has to somehow manage that. And unfortunately, the way that they manage it is not usually in collaboration with their legal aid providers, which is another difference from Scotland, because although the providers, you know, not everything that they want gets taken up, there is a much more kind of collaborative way of working between providers and the legal aid board up there, whereas here it's much more hostile. So I think we could do a vast amount much better with a bit of systems thinking and with a bit of collaborative work between Home Office, legal aid agency and providers. But I also think we actually need to take that decision making out of the Home Office and certainly out of the sphere of immigration, because they're two quite separate things and one might feed into the other, but you know, I don't think they should be directly linked.
It sounds like a toxic relationship.
Topic,
well, it feels like a toxic relationship being managed by the wrong people. So as you say, just everyone working in collaboration just puts a different warmth of energy. If everyone's respected and heard, you immediately move forward with a much better dynamic.
Yeah,
that simple thing of let's all talk, we need to come to you. You're talking to these people every day. What do you need? Yeah, it doesn't sound like rocket science, does it? We'll go and fix it after the call, Joe. We'll just pop into the Home Office and say stop doing this now.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Sam, you're back. You're the joy of technology.
Yes.
At the perfect moment, your internet fell.
Honestly, I don't understand it because I'm even in the office, so I can't even blame being at home. And I checked with everybody else, and everyone else's was fine, of course.
Well, thank you for persevering and coming back to us. And as you say, you'd like to keep going without your slides. You're just not going to tempt fate now.
No, that's it. I'm not going to share screen ever again in my work day. Not on this one, perhaps, anyway. So yeah, so if I'm sort of looking down, it's because I'm looking at my presentation, so apologies for that.
Thank you.
I know that I was on the UK modern slavery statistics. I think one of the other ones that I wanted to mention was around the percentage of positive conclusive grounds decisions, which has been listed at 91%, which is obviously extremely high, and kind of goes to show just how many victims are going through the NRM and are actually being identified as survivors of human trafficking. Just to go through some of the legal obligations and frameworks, so bounded by the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings, and the Directive 2011/36 EU of the European Parliament and of the Council on preventing and combating trafficking in human beings and protecting its victims, and finally the Modern Slavery Act 2015, which is for England and Wales, and there's separate legislation for Scotland and Northern Ireland. So what is modern slavery? So a quick definition. So a person commits an offence if the person holds another person in slavery or servitude and the circumstances are such that the person knows or ought to know that the person is held in slavery or servitude, or the person requires another person to perform forced or compulsory labour and the circumstances are such that the person knows or ought to know that the other person is being required to perform forced or compulsory labour. I'm also losing my voice today, so it's going well. I'll have a quick sip and hope that solves that. So with regards to the Palermo Protocol, which is the protocol to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, Article 3 of the protocol defines human trafficking as trafficking in persons shall mean the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harbouring or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, which could include abduction, fraud, deception and abuse of power. Exploitation shall include, at a minimum, the exploitation of the prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labour or services, slavery or practices similar to slavery, servitude or the removal of organs. I've been at Migrant Help since May 2011. I haven't personally come across any of those particular cases with regards to removal of organs, but that's not to say obviously that that's not going on. So with regards to the means, so it's threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, like I've mentioned, there'll be a purpose behind that. So definition of exploitation shall include, at a minimum, the exploitation or the prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation or forced labour or services. And the specific types of exploitation that we see are sexual, so someone is deceived, coerced, or forced to take part in sexual activity. Labour, which refers to situations where people are coerced to work for little or no remuneration, often under the threat of punishment. Domestic servitude, where there are restrictions on the domestic workers' movement and they are forced to work long hours for little pay. Under the other bracket, we have things like forced marriage, forced criminality, and organ harvesting, like I've mentioned before. General indicators of modern slavery. I do think that there is more awareness raising going on, and I do think the general public are hopefully better at spotting the indicators. Things like signs of physical or psychological abuse and trauma, appearing agitated or fearful, signs of malnourishment, poor physical hygiene. And obviously those are the things that you can see. And I think the trickier cases are those where it is more psychological, and it's going to take a lot more sensitive asking and potentially over a period of time as well for that person to trust you, to obviously let you know exactly what's going on. It could be that they have attended a particular service, don't speak any English, they have someone with them acting as their interpreter, but actually, you know, they're being instructed by that person. It could be, I don't know, sort of opening a bank account, going into the job centre to apply for benefits, things like that. So that could be a potential indicator as well. Evidence of control over movement, connected to a location or found in a location likely to be used for exploitation. An example of that would be a brothel. And one of the main ones that we see is around debt bondage. So, you know, either receiving very little or no pay because they are being asked to repay anything with regards to their travel to the UK, or even within the UK if the trafficking and exploitation has been here. So there's some of the key sort of general indicators. There are more specific indicators for the types of exploitation. I won't go through them all because there are a lot, so I'll just pick a few key ones. Sexual exploitation, sleeping at the premises where they work, could be that they have specific tattoos, limited English language, so sexualized vocabulary. Indicators of labour exploitation, transported to and from work, accompanied to appointments, restriction of movement, and with regards to health and safety. So if they're working at a factory site, for example, they've not had any health and safety talks, or they're not using the correct equipment, and also long working hours. Indicators of domestic servitude, typically, you know, living in with a family 24/7, no access to their own room, so they might be sleeping on the floor somewhere, constantly doing chores, so whether that's taking the children to and from school, shopping, you know, whatever it is, they will be asked to do that, and no access to any private space or sort of social contact either. So the National Referral Mechanism, what is that? So it's a framework for identifying victims of modern slavery and ensuring they receive the appropriate protection and support. So it's twofold, I guess. It's about collecting intelligence so that we can see what's going on, what are those trends, but also it allows the possibility to offer that potential victim support. You know, in terms of that side of things, that is voluntary, and they would have to consent to that, and if they don't, then they wouldn't have access to that. It's very unlikely. I think the majority of cases that we see, if they do go into the NRM and sign for that, then they do sign up for support as well. It was introduced in 2009 to meet the UK's obligations under the Council of European Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings. And why do we refer into the NRM? Like I just said, it encourages the sharing of information between agencies, ensuring an appropriate safeguarding response, and helps us to collect evidence and data to build a better picture of what's going on. So in terms of the MSVC service at Migrant Help, Modern Slavery Victim Care, I did already mention, I think, before I was cut off, that we are a subcontractor for the Salvation Army. There are around 13 to 14 subcontractors, I believe, and we're currently in the newer version of the contract, which started on the 4th of January 2021. But in terms of where we support, you can't see my map, which would make this bit a little bit easier, but I'll try and explain where we're based. So in terms of our outreach support, I'll start with that. It's called the South East and East Anglia. So we currently support in Kent, East and West Sussex, which is why obviously obviously we were invited to this particular webinar as well. Hampshire, Berkshire, the West Midlands, which is relatively new for us. So we're just sort of making our way there at the moment. Oxfordshire, Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. So it's quite a large outreach area that we do support potential victims in. And we also run an accommodation. So I have an accommodation manager and her advisors, they assist within a safe house environment. What sort of support do we provide? So usually an individual will come in post positive reasonable grounds decision, although it could be that the Salvation Army refers someone to us prior to that. And usually that's, you know, they would think that it's very likely that they're going to get a positive RG. There's lots of evidence to say that that would be the case. So if they do and they're completely destitute, then obviously we would provide that support. And then hopefully the positive RG would come in and we would continue that. Obviously, if it was a negative, then we would have to exit that individual pending any kind of reconsideration request. So during the actual reflection period, which is that post-RG, we would offer accommodation, outreach and move on and reach in. We conduct full risk assessments and needs-based assessments upon referral. And we also create bespoke journey plans with the service user, and we actively follow the person-centered approach. So we have some minimum expectations under the contract that we have to fulfill. And we'll go through that with the service user and collaborate with them on that. But there might be some other things holistically which we could look at and get them involved with, whether that's exercise, whether that's counselling, sort of specific types of that, and other sort of social groups and things like that. So they'll be allocated a designated advisor. So usually they will stick with that advisor unless for some reason things have to change. If the advisor leaves, unfortunately, then we would have to do that. Or if that particular service user changed region, we have different regional teams. So it might be that they'd have to change them. But we do sort of strongly follow the trauma-informed code of conduct and believe in continuity of care as much as possible. So we'll always seek to keep that same advisor. Other things that we have to provide under the contract are provision of subsistence, material assistance. So anybody that comes into our accommodation in particular, if quite often they come with nothing, they were completely destitute, might come with one bag of clothes and that's it. So we'll provide a move-in pack, so providing the key toiletries that they might need. And for women, obviously sanitary provisions. Also, we can apply that to outreach if they are destitute, sort of prior to receiving that initial subsistence. We can assist with things like clothing, for example. Access to medical treatment. So one of the key priorities at the start of the support is to make sure they're registered with a GP and that they've been able to access a full checkup. And obviously they're informed about how to access emergency treatment going forward and assisting with that. Assisting with court and criminal proceedings, access to education for any dependents. So we are an adult-only service, but if they do come with dependents, we obviously have obligations with regards to that, sort of in terms of safeguarding access to education. Access to interpretation and translation, and then referrals and signposting, to other specialist services. So that's sort of the anything else that we could possibly do section. We will do that with that individual. In terms of the decision making, it can take some time. It does vary case by case. I was supporting someone for a number of years, whereas there are other service users where those decisions might come in within 2 to 3 years. So it really does vary. But the good side of that, it gives us a long time to help them and to kind of get things embedded. So, it might be that things don't come up straight away that they want to do because they don't have the confidence, they don't have the trust in other organisations and professionals to do those things yet. So, those things can come sort of later on down the line. If they receive a positive conclusive grounds decision, we are obliged to undertake a recovery needs assessment, an RNA, which has a few strands to it. So it's about access to accommodation, making sure that that's safe and secure long term as much as possible. Access to finance, so have we been able to help them into the mainstream benefit system or any other sources of income, whether that's asylum support. and also the holistic needs, so access to translation. Do they still need that, and interpretation? Are there other ways that we still need to support them, and that is either agreed to by the Home Office or not? And obviously, if anybody does go forward to exit after their RNA, or it's a negative conclusive grounds decision, we'll give as much support as we can with that. One of our other priorities is to ensure people don't fall back into trafficking and re-exploitation as much as possible within the remit that we have. So in terms of the Nationality and Borders Bill, I'll be honest, this isn't my area of expertise. My area of expertise is with regards to supporting potential victims whilst they're in the NRM and awaiting their decisions, but it is something that Migrant Help has commented on. So I'm just going to go through some of the key points around that. So there's a concern that modern slavery has been included in an immigration bill, which could conflate two different areas of policy and move the UK focus away from spotting signs of exploitations and supporting potential victims. I think we've come a long way since the Modern Slavery Act came in 2015, and it would be such a shame to see us backtracking on that, and potentially that that having an impact on potential victims coming forward and accessing that support via the NRM. Survivors who come into the country through unconventional routes will be penalised. Survivors of slavery and trafficking brought to the country illegally can be refused protection, criminalised, or even deported. Slavery is not legal, therefore it's likely that survivors have been smuggled in illegally in the first place. There'll be no protection for survivors who have no documents. If you're a survivor of slavery and trafficking, you'll be asked to provide documentation in order to access protection and support under the new bill. Survivors frequently do not have their documents. Obviously, those that work in the sector know this already. Those exploiters have usually taken them, away, and whether that's to fraudulently open a new bank account, to access benefits, whatever the purpose of that might be for the exploiter, they just do not have them. So there is a concern about introducing something along those lines in terms of having a massive impact on those coming forward. If survivors were forced into crimes through no choice of their own, they will get no support or protection. Many people who are enslaved, they're forced to undertake criminal activity, groomed for personal gain. Common examples of this are growing cannabis. Quite frequently, we see that with regards to the Vietnamese nationals that come into service. Selling drugs. County lines is just huge, and probably deserves a whole other webinar in itself. But over the years, we've seen a huge increase in the number of British nationals coming into our service that is with regards to county lines. So that is of particular concern for us. As a result, many survivors of slavery are wrongly identified as criminals, and survivors of slavery will be disqualified from protection if they have been prosecuted for particular offences. And finally, survivors who are also under immigration control will face additional barriers. If they're also going through the asylum process, for instance, survivors will be required to produce additional paperwork within a set time frame in order to access support and protection. I think for me, this is one of the biggest concerns out of all of them. Having worked in the sector for over a decade now, with regards to how a service user presents when they first come into support, they are highly traumatized. They are not ready often to disclose the majority of what they have gone through. And in terms of our service, it's not something that we ask when they come in. It's something that if they choose to discuss later on, then obviously we'll happily we'll sit and listen, and we'll help them with that and get them the support they need. But to put a time frame, obviously, of submitting that evidence is of big concern with regards to the bill. That's my comments with regards to that, and obviously I've given an overview of the service. I hope that's okay.
Thank you, Sam. And I mean, it's strange you should mention it, but county lines was actually the topic of our last webinar. So for those
okay.
because you're absolutely right. So you can rewatch that one back on the Possibility Club, because yeah, absolutely, that all interconnects with this. I'm going to kick off with a question, but I'm going to, if the panelists have some too, I'll come to you after this. I wanted to get your perspective. As you say, you've been in this field for the last 11 years. How have needs changed? How has this landscape evolved?
I would say, when I first came in, it was mostly Eastern European nationals coming through that just wanted to work. They've been exploited, labour exploitation primarily, and all they want to do is get back to work, obviously in a safe way. Now, the complexity of the support needs that we're finding, it's almost as if we are sort of verging into sort of more support worker, I suppose. I mean, in terms of the advisors within the service, we're signposters and referrers. You know, we don't have the level of expertise needed for some of the things they need, whether it's around housing, whether it's around legal aid advice, you know. So basically, when someone comes in, we look at what those support needs are, we look at the risk assessment, and we will then do referrals and signpostings out. So in terms of complex needs, it's with regards to mental health, substance misuse. It could be that there's already criminal proceedings going on, so we're trying to establish if they've got a solicitor for that. Do they need that? Should we refer them on? It could be that we have pregnant or new mothers coming into service, and kind of all that brings. It's much more varied in terms of the nationalities, the gender, and the type of exploitation, and how it sort of they mix and merge. It's not just the case that somebody is a victim of labour exploitation. It could be that they are, you know, county lines, forced to put to work, also, you know, sexually. It could be all of them potentially. So it's very different in that sense as well.
And how big is your organisation? How many people are working to do all this? If also, as you said, there's a heck of a lot going on. What is the scale of your support group there?
So this particular MSVC service, we're now plus 50. When I first started, it was me and 2 others. So we have grown exponentially over the last decade. If you're sort of just referring to that, that's how many of us there are. And I did allude to it earlier that we have regional teams now, because initially we weren't doing such great outreach work and could base ourselves from our head office, but it just got so large, the number of outreach referrals coming in, we had to expand and grow accordingly. So we have office spaces in Dover and Stratford. We have one over in Oxford and just about to set up in Luton. And I've got team managers there, and then they have their advisors and admin. So yeah, it's much bigger now than it was a decade ago.
And is it funded by government? Is that a challenge as well, that the continuation of the funding and what they perceive, or following on from what Jo was saying, what they perceive as being what they want to fund and what's perceived as being of value?
So it is a government contract. So the Salvation Army have the contract from the government, and then, as I said before, they've subcontracted out to us. So yes, we have to follow very strict guidelines around that, which is why part of, you know, my role is partnership working, engaging in the sector, you know, to make sure if there's anything else we can do, apply for other sources of funding, we can do that and provide those additional levels of support to survivors.
Oh, Jo, do you want to ask Sam the question rather than me reading it out? Go for it.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, hearing you talk about the increased complexity of needs, whether it's that the people being trafficked and being held in slavery have changed, or whether we've got better at recognizing indicators of trafficking. So some people that would have been missed are now coming to you, and they're the more complex cases in many ways, so that they're the more complex needs. Because it was, you know, it was good to hear you talking about how, not good because it's all indescribably depressing, but, you know, the number of Vietnamese young people I used to represent when I was a barrister who had ended up in the criminal justice system and then in immigration detention awaiting deportation. And you go, Vietnam, cannabis cultivation, why has nobody, you know, why hasn't that been picked up on? Or, you know, a Sri Lankan woman who was found by the police in the attic of a building, you know, shouting for help, and nobody identified that as trafficking until it got to an asylum appeal. And you know, I think a lot of the time those things just get missed. So I'm just wondering how much of it is changing and what's happening, and how much is us collectively getting better at spotting it, if that's answerable.
Well, I was just going to start with, I think that's a massive question. But I think it's probably a combination of both, to be honest. I think, you know, I think there has been a much bigger push in terms of awareness raising around sort of local authorities, for example, and what their duties are around responding to NRM referrals that are possibly coming in. The police, I'm sure Emily can comment on that. I think there's just much more training and awareness raising that's gone on in the public domain and within other professional settings, which has allowed for more identification to happen. But I think with trafficking and exploitation, it's just ever changeable. It's whatever the demand is, So I think traffickers and exploiters are going to find ways where things have been identified to, try and manipulate that, and to try and be creative in a sense to find ways where people don't necessarily think that that's a criminal act and an act of slavery. So I think it's a combination.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you for Joe for your questions. And last but not least, Emily, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Lucy. Yes, thank you very much. My name is Emily Drew. I am an exploitation coordinator for Sussex Police. Today, I'm just going to briefly talk to you about what we do as Sussex Police, what the briefest of pictures are, and what we have now several teams set up dedicated to exploitation that I will talk you through, kind of what we are, what we do, and how we're adding to that picture. So as you're all aware, you're all here today as well, and you've heard from some fantastic speakers as well, that organised immigration crime, modern slavery, trafficking, it is around, and unfortunately it is increasing. And we are, as a force and as a county, seeing an increase in those numbers as well. And we also acknowledge that there are complex reasons why people may choose or may be forced to make dangerous crossings and come into the country illegally, and that quite a lot of those people are likely to be exploited. We actively deal with such cases, and one you may be aware of that's been in the news recently is the number of missing young people from the missing young unaccompanied asylum seeking children from specific Home Office hotels within the force, which is something that locally our police are working really, really hard on. This topic is something that everyone has an opinion on, and it's important to state that as a police employee and as a police force, we must remain impartial, especially on the new bill that's been enacted. But we will continue to focus on safeguarding the vulnerable and proactively preventing exploitation. So what I can do today is explain to you what Sussex Police as a force are doing in this arena. Now, I must firstly apologise because my face was not the one you're supposed to be seeing today. My manager, Tim Reed, was supposed to be here, but unfortunately, urgent police business has drawn him away. So I am kind of regurgitating the presentation that he was to deliver. So I'm not the foremost expert, but I will try and do my best with the information that I can pass on to you. So in terms of Sussex Police and our response to modern slavery, it is a priority for the force, and as alluded to, it is something that has been a huge amounts of training and internal awareness has been dedicated to. For example, there are specific modern slavery courses that are available to officers, and quite a lot of internal dialogue that goes on as well, which helps raise that profile. At the beginning of this year, Sussex Police founded a new dedicated exploitation team, which came into force around about June, which is the team that I sit on. So this exploitation team consists of 3 exploitation coordinators and 1 manager, who is Tim. Our team works across the force on all types of exploitation, such as child exploitation, modern slavery, organised immigration crime, human trafficking, and serious violence. And we work both internally within the police and externally as well. Each coordinator is each of the 3 coordinators is designated a local area. So, for example, I cover Brighton and Hove, and my other colleagues cover East and West Sussex. And then we also take a lead on a specific type of exploitation. So, for example, my colleague Steph, she leads on organised immigration crime, and this would definitely be her wheelhouse, but unfortunately, she's on holiday at the moment, which is great for her. So In terms of what our team does, internally, we're there to support officers and support policy and the way in which things work, systems, and make sure that they're efficient, they're doing what they're supposed to do, and if there are any ways we can improve them, learning from best practice, and working with partners as well to make sure that the processes internally within the police are as robust as they can be. Similarly, when we look at the role that we will play externally, it's hugely about partnership working, which is the key to everything, especially in an arena which, as you've alluded to previously, is incredibly complex. It needs several different people moving different cogs in order to get these victims what they need, essentially. We work very closely with the Sussex Anti-Slavery Network, and which encompasses a huge variety of different agencies, including the local authority, victim services, etc. Obviously, we work closely with Migrant Help as well, as ways to make sure that, one, the police are best placed to respond to victims of exploitation, and that we as a police force can help assist other agencies as well. In terms of the other specific forms of exploitation that our team cover, for example, my specialist area is county lines, and my other colleague is taking a lead on kind of child exploitation, things like that. And the other forms we kind of deal with generally. So our role, in a nutshell, is to be a single point of contact for each area within Sussex on all matters of exploitation, and then also a kind of force expert in a way on the different topics within exploitation too. So on that basis, if there is anything you wish that you wish to have a conversation about our team, see what our team can do, can help facilitate, or if there's anything you wish to discuss, please do drop an email. I will put the email in the chat and hopefully pass everything on, but it is exploitation@sussex.police.uk. So what are we doing then specifically to do with trafficking and organised immigration crime? Well, our team specifically are reviewing individual cases and incidents, especially involving clandestine boats and lorry arrivals. We're using a lot of that best practice, a lot of our own research to help inform the police's response to these incidents. We've also reviewed and revised processes and information available for officers internally on how to respond to any boat or lorry arrivals, how to, we've refreshed specific guidance on that as well. We work with local authorities, children's services to ensure that the right support is in place for any young people within the area, and we as a team are well placed to navigate any changes imposed by the Nationality and Borders Act that is coming in. However, as the legislation is quite new, it is relatively early in its implementation, and so we are still working on what that's going to look like, and can't provide much other information on that at this point, unfortunately. Lastly, as well, we have an excellent piece of news which is helping us bolster our what we provide in the exploitation arena, and that is that we have just got funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner for a victim navigator from Justice and Care. She's called Holly, and she has a fantastic 20 years of experience working in policing, including child protection, child exploitation, modern slavery, and human trafficking. She has specialised as a victim navigator for the past 3 years in different police forces across the country. As part of this role, what she's going to be doing is reviewing all NRM, National Referral Mechanism, referrals received into Sussex to make sure that the right information is being put in them, that the right partners are being drawn in, that the evidence we're providing is to a good standard. Holly is also linking in with all divisional investigations and intelligence teams to identify potential victims and cases to engage with and provide support. She is particularly focusing on organised immigration crime and will be heavily involved in this specific area of exploitation. She will be primarily based with the Discovery team, the police modern slavery team based in Hastings, as their specialist modern slavery human trafficking team, but she's working across the whole of the county. So she aims to improve victim support, strengthen modern slavery investigations, and increase prosecution rates. And she can do this by providing independent support for victims at point of first encounter through to prosecution and/or repatriation, helping victims understand and access their rights at an early stage and improving their trust and relationship with police. So in terms of what she can offer guidance and resources for operations, including help with reception centres. She can act as a bridge between victims, support and police investigators. She frees up police time and resources, allowing us to focus on criminal investigations. She provides independent advocacy to help police and victims navigate the NRM, the National Referral Mechanism, and manage day-to-day contact with victims. She can provide training to officers and other stakeholders on victim navigation, on organised immigration crime, and if you would like to know more information than I can give you, she's more than happy to have a talk to you about what she can provide. She can give support for smooth repatriations and maintain engagement with victims and witnesses in source countries, and foster greater engagement with victims in info sharing, investigations and prosecutions. Now, I realise that my little talk to you has been a bit brief. I do apologise. Once again, I did get the call to talk to you today, this morning, but that is the nature of the area that we work in, unfortunately. So I hope that I've been able to give you an overview of some of the things that Sussex Police are doing to make sure that we are continuing to safeguard vulnerable people, to proactively prevent exploitation within Sussex. If you got any questions, go ahead and let me know.
Emily, you did a brilliant job considering a couple of hours ago you weren't doing this. Come on. be kind to yourself. And my first question to you is how this education, because a lot of what we talked about through these sessions is awareness and about addressing those signs. As you know, both Sam and Joe talked about, modern slavery takes many different flavors and forms. I know in one of our earlier sessions we talked about car valet or car cleaning, car washing, and that app, and lots of different ways of encouraging the public to be more visual. And I know that the church was amazing in the first session I did, both two churches, around how they help their congregations feel that they could address and report without worrying that they might be found out, that there's all this confidence, isn't it, because they're not quite sure what they're seeing. And how have you found that with sort of the officers basically on the street who are out there? How do you open their eyes to see things that maybe as humans we're not prepared to see?
I think it's complicated. It does involve a lot of training, and it involves a lot of reorientation of officer mindset, and this encompasses a whole range of things, and it's about trying to strip it back and going back to kind of the voice of the victim, and reminding people that this is what exploitation is, because officers on the street, they see the worst of the worst the majority of the time, and it's always about reinstilling that victim focus, especially when you're talking, and this is my own expertise coming in, but when you're talking about things like county lines, for example, trying to remember the voice of the child, if you must, to the extent that, yes, this child might be coming to notice for several different offences, but what's behind that? Dig a little bit deeper, continue to have that professional curiosity and to question what you're seeing, because we know that people like that, we know that exploiters are operating, within our borders, and we know how they're working, but we need to continually remind people to be on the lookout for that. And that you might have a small suspicion, but the best thing you can do is pass on that information. And it is those apps like that, the app that you mentioned, and also work that's being done with Crime Stoppers, that's really important to encourage individuals to pass on what they know and to report information, because essentially if the police's hands are relatively tied, if we don't have the intelligence or the information, if no one tells us what's going on, we are, we won't know, we can't do what we need to do.
And
so
you need to have enough data points to build that full awareness, because I mean, as Sam, you were saying, some of these, it's very subtle. When you talk about the person who's translating for somebody and you might think, oh, that's nice, there's some nuances there. So it's kind of, you don't want to jump at everything as being negative, but you want to be aware and say the police needs enough data points so you suddenly see, you can see trends, or because you say you can't be jumping to conclusions, you don't have the resources to go and talk to everybody. So you do need to empower the public to be your extra eyes and ears, but without being reporting everything. If that filtering is very difficult.
It's difficult because it's so nuanced, as you said, and it's, policing is about gathering evidence, and evidence for a lot of these crimes can be tricky to obtain. Quite often, you don't get the victims wanting to come forward, or even victims recognizing that they are victims. And that places, the police are being encouraged now to do more evidence-led investigations, not relying so much on the victim within these areas. But of course, they're incredibly difficult to get that evidence. For example, the translator, where the concrete evidence for that is quite difficult to establish. So that's why intelligence generally is highly encouraged to give as much information as possible, and also why Holly's new role as the victim navigator is incredibly important, because she helps build confidence in victims. She helps them want to support themselves and come forward and give us the information and the evidence we need to help make sure that these people don't hurt anyone else.
And Sam, I'll take you off mute because I wanted to bring you, because this dovetails into exactly what you're doing, because you were saying about the emotional position a lot of people are. So, and Joe rightly pointed out that it's true that victims don't want to be defined as that, or accept they're being exploited. So there's a whole web here that that could mean that people aren't going to come forward. So Sam, how do you encourage somebody who's in that position, who's come to you by, hopefully by some means they found your services? Where do you start? Because it can take a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So Migrant Help is listed as a designated first responder organisation. So as an organisation as a whole, if somebody obviously did call in or did come into one of our office spaces, we would be, one of those key points for that potential victim to come forward with their story and obviously disclose and let us help them. But it can be difficult. I mean, I've in the past had some individuals come into the office where, I've had some suspicions, and like you said before, Lucy, they are sort of minor, and you're thinking, okay, but is this adding up into, something more, or is it just a case of, something completely separate? You don't want to jump the gun and scare them off equally. I suppose one of my concerns as well is that if you don't get in there early enough, that they might not come back to the office. So for me, especially around safeguarding, it's always to try and ask the question, but as sensitively as possible. And in terms of the training around that we do, so we do now have within our team, within MSVC, we have some designated NRM referrers. So they do a combination of work, so NRM referrals and this work under the contract. So, the way that we approach it is more from an indicator point of view. We have that in front of us, but we'll just ask them to tell us what's happened and keep that very open-ended. And then with our training and experience, we'll have a look, obviously, and see if it's matching up with the things that we're seeing. But then, even then, potentially, like we said before, it could be something completely new that doesn't fall into one of the neat boxes. So for me, it's about addressing it sensitively, providing sort of, we've got an out of hours, so we have an on-call number, we'll give that to them. If you want to talk to us again, if you want to arrange another appointment, we can sort that out, making sure that there's an interpreter available. Should they wish to use that. Some don't. Some, again, they come to us and they're very, very scared, and they don't trust anybody. And it might be in particular that they don't trust anybody from their home country, and they don't want the interpreter because they might know their family, and there's fear of reprisals and all of these sorts of things. So it's very complex, but I think we just go from a very person-centered, human to human, contact situation of, just tell me what's happened, and we'll see if we can help you.
And Joe, you're nodding furiously. Let me bring you into this as well, because you're right. I guess some people think that the law won't help them in this environment, that it's not going to be on their side. Joe, what are your experiences in this?
I think that's so true. People are afraid to approach the police or afraid to approach the Home Office because they don't think they'll be treated as victim. They think they'll be treated as the offender. And quite often the exploiter has already sort of played on that and told them, well, you don't even have any documents because the exploiter has them. So you can't even prove who you are or how you got here. So I just think that the victim navigator is a brilliant step, and it's something that some of the law centres have started doing, having these crisis navigators, because everything gets so fragmented, doesn't it? It's like the police handle one thing, but different teams in the police handle different aspects. And then there's migrant help, and then there's the Home Office, and there's different elements of the Home Office, because you've got the NRM and you've got the asylum and you've got the other aspects of it. And then, to have somebody that from the victim's perspective can pull all that together, I think is such a great step.
You might have to clone Holly.
Yeah.
She's going to be busy.
Well, what I was then going to say is, I don't know how long she's been in post, but I wonder whether she's encountered that difficulty yet with getting people to legal advice when they need it, because presumably some of those people need an asylum rep, as well as maybe a criminal lawyer, as well as maybe an employment solicitor or whatever. But I imagine it would be very difficult to get them, at least in Sussex. So I just wondered if she'd encountered that yet.
I'm not sure. She's relatively new to Sussex's force, but she has been working with other forces as part of what she was doing previously. Definitely worth asking her the question. I don't know, but give me an email and I'll pass you on, and she'll definitely be able to have a really good conversation about that.
That'd be really useful. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that we've had some amazing experiences with victim navigators as well. I think she was Surrey based. I can't remember her name at the moment, but so helpful for us. She just managed to gain the trust and talk to them about criminal proceedings, because quite often, I mean, I don't have full knowledge about how things work, and I live here and I was born here, so being able to explain what to expect if they went forward with the police investigation, and what to expect when they attend court, and sort of being their advocate in that sense, and that really helps our advisors, because our primary concern is obviously sorting everything else out as much as we can in terms of where are they living, is that long term, let's try and get that so it is, what's their finance situation so they don't fall back into exploitation, and all the other things around counselling, etc. So to have a dedicated person just about this, for me, is the way forward around securing more prosecutions as well, because it's dedicated, it's a service effectively, to provide that support and information for that.
And I agree that most of us would struggle to navigate our own system in this country. Imagine if we were doing this in a country where we didn't speak the language, potentially, where we didn't feel that we belonged. There's such a complexity of emotional, as well as the other layers within it. I wouldn't know particularly what to start with here or who to talk to, and the police feels like a good place to start, but it's daunting.
On that issue, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not having a go at you, Sam, before I start. There's been reports lately about, and I know I'm familiar with it, the phone ringing and ringing and ringing at migrant help. Like, if you're that first point of contact, how confident are you that people can actually get to you if they're in, say, asylum support, or they've come from over on a boat or a lorry? How confident are you that they get to you in the first place to have that conversation?
Obviously, I can't comment too much on that side of it, because that's air, so it is a separate department to myself. With regards to sort of potential modern slavery victims, I think, like I said, we do have an out of hours number. It is on our website, which is separate to the other number that you're referring to. So if obviously that kind of relies on the person self-identifying though, or the organisation identifying. So I hear what you're saying around that. But also, with regards to the other services, they do provide advice and guidance too. So it is a busy line, as we know, but I can't sort of comment any further sort of than that at the moment in terms of modern slavery side of things. That's obviously my area.
Yeah, fair enough.
And that was one of the earlier sessions we had, where the role in the church, where people go And so there was the Catholic Church and Church of England talking about, all nationalities will go to a house of faith, and their role in these conversations as trusted advisors, as a safe place to talk about fears and concerns. And yeah, it's just all that touch points, isn't it? Having that web out there, that wherever people feel they can engage, there is a route for them to come and talk and ask for help.
Can I add a yes, but on the churches?
Of course
or
you
the
can.
faith places, because I think sometimes, particularly around immigration advice, at least, that's the point of exploitation. They're going in and somebody in the church that's known to everyone around them says, oh, I'll get you your papers, pay me £5,000 or whatever. And people are paying all this money to people that are not regulated lawyers and not regulated accredited immigration advisors, and because they're within the church, they're trusted. And I don't know whether that goes beyond like the legal advice type exploitation to other forms, but I also think you have to be quite careful about who you treat as the trusted intermediaries, because the places of faith can be brilliant, but they can also be a risk point.
No, that's really good feedback. I hadn't heard that. Go on, Sam.
No, I'd echo that. I think sort of from experience here as well, when service users come in to support, obviously we look at what they've already got in place, and sometimes they do already have. They won't sort of say it's a legal aid sister. They'll just say, I have someone or something, and then we'll be sort of probing a little bit further. What's their name and what's the name of their company, and sort of have a due diligence check to see what's going on. But ultimately, we can only kind of look into that and advise and say, look, you are entitled to legal aid advice and guidance. We don't think what you have is. Here's the list. If you want to go away and have a think about it, we can always help you to be referred to someone else. But yeah, I don't know the extent of that as an issue, but it's definitely something that's come up, as Joe mentioned there.
Yeah, it's good and bad in there. I'm going to, as we look into wrapping up, I was going to ask everyone who's listening in to fill in this feedback form, because this is a conversation, obviously, it's been led by the University of Sussex, and we would like to continue it. We also do aging well, which I've also enjoyed. Again, two topics we don't like talking about. We've aged as we've sat here, but not in a negative way. So aging well is also on the Possibility Club as well. So you can see both of these conversations that have been going through. I mean, I feel that it feels like we've come to a very natural conclusion. Lots of thoughts, as you said, Joe, really tough. This is not an easy topic, but it is. Every time we have one of these conversations, I feel that we've moved forward. I now feel I'd be able to signpost somebody. I know on the call, people listening to this, some of whom do work in this sector, some of whom are brand new. And for every person we bring into this conversation, I feel like we're going to help somebody. We're going to identify someone who needs us. And that's got to be a good move forward. But I want to thank our wonderful panel. Thank you all for joining us. Emily, for doing a brilliant job of being Tim. And as we wrap up, is there anything you think we haven't covered, or anything else you'd like to share before we finish? No, or silence, it's all good. But thank you all very much. And thank you so much for joining us, of those watching back and live today. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Take care.